welcome back to another episode of That's Business. Today's guest, Chrysta Bairre, is a brand new friend that I'm literally meeting the first time on this podcast. If you're a follower of us on LinkedIn and you saw my post about what it's like to get fired and how we should normalize it, I'm so blessed that Chrysta found me and I loved her background and said we need to do a podcast. And hey, here we are. I'm so excited to have this conversation. So Chrysta, before we get into the burnout, you being an author and the badass that you are, because there's so many facets of you, did you always know you wanted to help people or kind of be this advocate in a way? Or what was your childhood growing up, if you don't mind me asking?
I would say I definitely was always a helper growing up, especially, I'm a late diagnosed autistic. So when I was a child, I did not know I had autism, but, I had a lot of the hallmarks that came along with that. I didn't have a lot of friends. I could be very socially awkward, and helping people was like the space that I created for myself, because even if you're socially awkward or you don't fit in, like when you have a role and you're like helping someone, that felt much more organic and natural for me than just trying to socialize with other kids.
Mm-hmm.
And, it gave me a way to fit in and belong. So, I do think that I was like that as a kid. And, when I was younger, I did have this idea in my head. I really wanted to be a veterinarian, which is a helping profession. Although, I don't know, do vets help animals more than people? I think it's pretty equal, actually. So yes, that was the thing that I really wanted to do when I was little. But it was oriented around, yes, being of service and serving.
That's amazing. Now, something I feel is a very big topic, and of course, you having your neurodiverse community that I definitely want to talk about too. How did you know, or what kind of inspired you to get tested for autism and I don't want to say figure this out, but what kind of gave you that itch to get diagnosed?
Oh, wow. Yeah, so much to unpack there. If you had asked me 10 years ago if I thought I was autistic, I would have said no, no way. Because at that point in time, I very much had the stereotypical idea of what autism looks like in my mind, what we tend to see represented in the media or on television and those kinds of things. And so, often what we're seeing represented is a very narrow experience of what autism can be. And so 10 years ago, I would have said, no, absolutely not. But what happened for me is now that I know and I look back at my history, I'm like, oh, there it was there it was there. Like right now, it's really, really obvious. But perimenopause, yeah. So perimenopause hit me like a ton of bricks. And it brought out a lot of my autistic characteristics in a pretty significant way that I hadn't seen since I was a teenager. And that's really what started me on this journey, because I was like, why am I like this? Why am I like this? Why am I like this? Like, what is happening to me right now? And yeah, so the perimenopause really turned my life upside down in a lot of ways. And actually, there's a study out there that shows that undiagnosed autistic women will often get diagnosed in perimenopause because the changes that are going on physiologically will tend to bring out a lot of the autistic traits make them more obvious.
Mm-hmm.
And so that really was what it was for me. I started trying to figure out what was going on with me. I knew there was a sensory aspect to it. I was getting some sensory related occupational therapy, brought up a lot of the questions of could there also be an autistic, piece of this conversation? And, sure enough, yep, there it is. There it was. And, I've learned so much more about what it really looks like to be autistic, which is not one thing. It's not that stereotypical. It can be that stereotypical idea, but that is such a narrow experience of autism. And it can be a lot of other things as well.
Now, for those that may not know, what is perimenopause, first of all?
Oh, great question. Yeah. So perimenopause is the transition in, someone who has female reproductive organs. Basically, you transition out of being able to have babies anymore, right? So something that I learned from a health coach that I know is one of the interesting things that happens during perimenopause is, when you're in your reproductive years, estrogen is made by the ovaries. But when you go through perimenopause, what happens is, I think she said it's the adrenals start creating the estrogen. the ovaries stop producing estrogen and then the adrenals take over that job. So you still have estrogen. It's just produced differently by a different organ in your body. And so that's like one of the interesting things that's happening. And so, you stop ovulating and stop producing estrogen from your ovaries. And so, there's all kinds of hormones that are just all over the place during that process.
Now, going through the process of getting diagnosed and all, because this is a lot of people are getting diagnosed. I mean, I didn't know I had any type of ADHD until TikTok was a little too accurate for me. And then looking at my friends I surrounded myself with, I was like, there's something here. And they're like, no, you totally are. You don't know this. And it was just a whole, I don't want to say identity crisis, but kind of. So what was that like? Because it's on one hand, at least in my experience, it was confirmation I'm not crazy and it made sense. But it also was kind of funny, but also gave me some answers and being more out there of like, sorry, I'm in brain fog right now, or I'm in hyper focus right now. So what was that diagnosis like for you?
So many mixed emotions because it felt like there was so much writing on it. And it was so impactful to my sense of my own identity. And a lot of things that I had believed about myself to be true started to shift, because of things that I was told as an undiagnosed autistic child. I was told that I was difficult, that it was hard to be friends with me. I was told by multiple other peers throughout my youth that it was really hard to be friends with me. I was told by adults that I was difficult. I was told that I was being obstinate a lot. I was told that I overreacted a lot. It made it difficult for me to trust my own experience of the world. So like when I was having a sensory experience that was different than the average person's sensory experience, like when I could hear or smell or taste things differently than other people, and I would say what I was experiencing, and I was so often invalidated and told that I wasn't hearing that, or I wasn't hearing it at that volume, or, all of that, it really impacted my ability to trust my own experience of my life. And so I have done a lot of self-development work and, had some level of self-trust that I'd established, but there's still always this verification. Like before my diagnosis, I would kind of check in with other people. I'd be like, is that right? Like this is what I'm experiencing, but like, is that right? And I would have this sort of default perspective of like checking with other people to validate my own experience because I was so used to other people invalidating it and just feeling like somehow I was wrong about what I was experiencing. And so it was very empowering in the sense that it gave me a way to orient to my past experiences as well as my current experience and to understand that I could trust myself in my own experience of the world. And that it was like, oh, okay, it's not that I am not having this experience. It's that the other person is not sharing the experience that I'm having. And so it was validating in those kinds of ways. And many, many ways that I have self-accommodated over the years without even realizing that's exactly what I was doing. I would have to make excuses for some of my self-accommodations sometimes. Or sometimes I would just make myself uncomfortable to like go to a restaurant that someone else loved, but that I hated from a sensory perspective because it was like really noisy or loud or chaotic or something. And so either I would basically lie, if we're being honest, I basically lie about why I didn't want to go to that restaurant, or I would decline an invitation just because it was in an environment that I knew would be very overwhelming for me. Or I would go and basically put myself in an incredibly uncomfortable or sometimes even painful environment in order to belong or get along or not have to make those excuses and lie about, why I didn't want to go do certain things or why certain things were hard. At some point after all the invalidation that I received as a child, I just stopped telling people what my experience was. In many cases, unless I had sort of vetted that this was like an okay thing to share. And so it was validating because then I was able to say, like, I gave myself permission to say to people, I would prefer to choose a different restaurant because that place is too noisy. And it didn't feel like that was just me being, as I've been called, lame or overdramatic or whatever the thing is, it's like, no, I actually have like a real condition that is impacting this. And so it was made it easier to own that. But, growing up, if you're familiar with the story of the princess and the pea, where this princess can feel this tiny pea under this stack of 100 mattresses, that's how sensitive she is. And, growing up, that's what people used to call me, the princess and the pea, because I would experience things that people were like, there's no way that you feel that pea under the stack of 100 mattresses, And so again, me accommodating myself or asking for what I wanted, asking for accommodation from someone else, it felt in my own mind, that voice in my head, which I call the itty bitty shitty committee, that itty bitty. Yes.
I love that, stealing that. That's amazing.
Steal away. The itty bitty shitty committee, would say would repeat something that I'd heard a lot as a child, which is like, stop being a princess. And now I can say I have the diagnosis and I can confidently say, I don't want to go to that restaurant. Can we choose a different one? Or this experience is going to be uncomfortable for me. And I don't have shame around it. And for most of my life, I had shame around that. I had shame around either asking for or making excuses about my accommodations or my needs. Or I had shame for forcing myself to go into these environments and get incredibly overstimulated and then go home after and be so overstimulated that I couldn't function or couldn't talk to people for days. And I felt shame about that. There's something wrong with me. And the diagnosis gave me this lens to say, there's not something wrong with me. I am not broken. I am not a broken version of a neurotypical person. Neurotypical being somebody who doesn't have a neurodivergent condition. It's like, I'm not a broken version of a neurotypical person or a regular person. I am a human being. And this is just how I experience the world. And it's not because there's something wrong with me. It's because there's something different about me. And I don't feel that shame anymore.
And I know there's a good getting fired story in here, which brought us together. I have to hear that story, of course. But what got you thinking to start your business? And I guess a better question would be, how was working in corporate? What year did you recently get diagnosed, or did you know while working corporate? Walk us through that.
Yeah. So I did not get diagnosed with autism until I was 48 years old. So this was last year. I'm 49 now, so I'm almost 50.
Oh, it's real recent.
Yeah, it's real recent. Yeah.
Okay.
I mean, I had this awareness that I might be for a couple of years, but it's difficult to get a diagnosis as an adult in this country because, insurance, and there's wait lists, and there's the cost factor, and there's just all these different elements. So it's real recent, but I always struggled in corporate, honestly. Now I know, right? Now I have the lens to understand because I'm an autistic person, and that's why I had a struggle. So for a lot of my professional career before I became a business owner, I very much preferred to work for small business because I found that small business dynamics were different from corporate dynamics, and there was often a little bit more wiggle room for me to be comfortable being me than there was in a corporate environment. So I have had some corporate jobs and always found them very hard. I didn't fit in, didn't belong, honestly did not stay in those jobs very long. I mean, I definitely was one of those people that had a history of changing jobs every year to 2 years, which is really common now. But, when I was in my 20s and 30s, that was a little bit less common at that time. Again, aging myself here, but, in the mid to late 90s, that was considered a negative thing to be changing jobs every couple of years. But I couldn't tolerate. It was difficult for me to be successful. I mean, I was successful to a point, but it was really, really challenging in a corporate environment. So I changed jobs a lot. And small business is where I was able to have the most longevity within organizations. But ultimately, I decided to go into business myself. I think because I realized that working for someone else was really challenging for me. And I wanted to be able to have the freedom and autonomy to work in a way that I knew I thrived, and the way that I thrived, a lot of workplaces won't always let you do that. If you don't have a diagnosis and you can't ask for accommodations, or you don't know that that's the language you need to be using, or, whatever the thing is. So, I started a business because I knew how I worked best. And I wanted to be able to fully leverage that. But it was more than that, too. It's I was at this impasse in my professional career where I was exploring the idea of going into organizational development, of kind of making a slight adjustment to my career path and really focusing on organizational development. And I did a bunch of informational interviews and talked to all kinds of people. And I ultimately decided that I wanted to be helping people directly without the limitations that they're sometimes in place in corporate. Because in corporate, even if you are in a role where you are empowering and supporting staff, like maybe you're in HR or you're in training and development or organizational development, you're very much limited by what the company will allow you to do, by the budget, by all these things. And I was like, no, I really want to help people. I want to help people do what I have done, which is learn how to navigate work better and learn how to be honoring of myself and learn how to create accommodations for myself. I want to be helping other people to do that and be empowered in their careers. And if I have to answer to the company, if the company is who pays me and not the individual, then I'm limited in how I can do that. And I was like, fuck that. I don't want to be limited. I want to really help people where it's going to have the most impact. So that was essentially why I went in and started my business as a career coach. That's what that looked like.
That's incredible. One of the big things we, of course, have discussed or talk about that's so relevant, burnout and imposter syndrome.
Yeah.
I mean, of course, throw in a pandemic, throw in all the world's issues, depending on the week. But why is this such a big topic to talk about and to advocate for, as maybe some people don't realize they're burning out or don't have a name? And let's break it down to what imposter syndrome is and then go into that answer, please.
Yeah, absolutely. So, the original definition that I encountered for imposter syndrome was the persistent fear of being found out as a fraud. And early on in my coaching business, I was doing a lot of speaking out at networking groups and things like that. And that's how I was getting most of my clients. And I had heard the word imposter syndrome thrown around, and it just didn't resonate with me because my itty bitty shitty committee does not use the word fraud. That's not the phrase or the term, that it uses. And so I heard about it, but I was just kind of like, okay, I don't really know what that is. Well, then I was asked to give a presentation on imposter syndrome. And so I started doing research around it and digging into it and reading case studies and all of these things. And I realized I have experienced imposter syndrome personally. And many of the clients that I had worked with have experienced it as well. And my word that my voice uses is not fraud. It's different language, but it essentially means this similar idea of you don't deserve or you haven't earned or you don't belong here. Like that's kind of the energy of it, right? These opportunities. And then I later on found a definition of imposter syndrome that I really like that was, I'm going to just try to say this off the top of my head, so I might not get it exactly right, but something along the lines of, feeling as though your accomplishments and achievements have not been legitimately earned. So I was like, yes, that definition resonates more than like the persistent fear of being found out as a fraud. But it's a similar idea. You can see, right? This idea of like, you haven't legitimately earned this or you don't actually deserve this. And I felt like that all the time. I mean, I think especially as an undiagnosed autistic person, I felt like that, like I was pretending in order to, have the success that I had achieved. But what was so surprising to me, when I was researching is that I've seen different statistics out there, but a common statistic that I've seen is that up to 70% of people will experience imposter syndrome at some point in time. And I've spoken on this topic to hundreds and hundreds and hundreds of people. I mean, I've spoken on this topic over 80 times throughout the years. And I hear a lot of stories from the audiences, and it is just always surprising to me, first of all, the diverse demographics that this impacts. Like it is really a very universal experience and how it's showing up for people. And so, it's like, why is this showing up for people? There's a lot of discussion about that, why this is. I've heard a lot of information that suggests there's a systemic cause underlying. I think that is probably very likely true. But, I also believe that some of it is society in the sense that we very much, in the United States at least, value this idea of being self-made, of pulling yourself up by your bootstraps, of the hustle culture. And to be prideful, to be proud of yourself, to believe in yourself aren't really traits that we actually encourage. to believe yourself, to be validated in your lived experiences, I think is not something that we really encourage. And I think it's that, consistent invalidation that contributes to imposter syndrome. And one of the causes of imposter syndrome that is suggested in some of the research is, the inability to integrate our accomplishments. So it's that to take credit for, to take ownership of the things that are awesome and amazing about you and the accomplishments you've achieved, like to pat yourself on the back. I mean, we just finished the Olympics and Simone Biles, said, we need to stop asking athletes after they win an Olympic medal, what are you going to do next? Let them enjoy this moment. And that right there, I think there's something in that dynamic that is why imposter syndrome is so prevalent, because it's we have this society and this culture of you win an Olympic medal and people aren't really congratulating you. They're what's next? What are you going to do now? Right? It's this constant, we're moving the goalpost constantly. And we don't get the opportunity to just enjoy our success. And if we are perceived to be enjoying our success and believing in ourselves, I mean, again, Simone Biles, using her as an example, she gets so much shade for believing in herself. Yeah. Her confidence in herself, her saying things like, I am the GOAT, and having her GOAT necklace. There are so many people that criticize her. And it's whoa, let's take a step back. I mean, this woman has accomplished incredible feats. But our society views her ownership of that, how she's embodying her hard work, how she is proud of what she has done as negative. Mm-hmm. That's where imposter syndrome comes in. When you've been told that your whole life, that it's somehow shameful or wrong or bad to be proud of yourself for the things that you've worked for, that's where it starts to creep in.
And I like to compare when people say that, you were so in love with Tom Brady, or, oh yeah, of course he could say he's the GOAT. I feel it's so different for men and women, and it's not shared experiences. If you compare apples and oranges, it's ridiculous. Mm-hmm. I love that you brought that up as we keep moving the goalpost further. You're single. Well, why aren't you in a relationship? You're in a relationship. Well, when are you getting married? You get married. Well, when are you having kids? You don't want to have kids. What's wrong with you? All of those pieces. And that's the annoying part of not only this, of the career side, but the personal side. And it's just who's sitting down making these rules? And it's really interesting and of course, us being career coaches, of just who's telling you this narrative of, you're not good enough. And believe me, I have had an off week. I practice what I preach, because this week has been not my week. And we all face it. And something that was interesting, talking with a friend who has a $10 million company, she is very wealthy. She's doing it. She gives back to the community, is just an overall great person. And for her to say the other day, oh, I sometimes don't feel like I'm good enough. I'm excuse me? What? So it's just so interesting, because we can't always assume everyone's okay. We're all human. We all go through this, and you have your own lived experiences. And I think that's just a great reminder to bring up. But that's one of the many topics that fires me up of, what are you going to do? What's this? I want blah, 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 blah. But back to you. Tell us about this community you developed and where the idea came from it, because I feel like a lot of listeners will be interested in it.
Yeah, so I started this women's leadership and empowerment community. It's called She Goes High. We're based in Northern Colorado, so we are primarily in person. But where this community came from is when I was starting my business, I really had to be putting myself out there, day after day after day, putting myself out there. And it's not only business owners do that. Job seekers do it all the time. Career professionals do it all the time, but particularly people in a job search. That's what it is. You're putting yourself out there day after day after day. And that shit is exhausting, right? It is exhausting to keep putting yourself out there. And so, I'm a new business owner and I'm putting myself out there day after day. And that was, intense. And I was also getting the message a lot, to be authentic. And I was what? I understand what the word means, but in my entire life, no one has ever said, Chrysta, be authentically you. That's what we want you to do. No. in school, it was like, be a good student, be like this, fit this mold. That's what it was like in school. In career, again, it's like, be you, but like be a less you. Be you, but like be less.
Mm-hmm.
Right? Be a little more homogenous. Be a little more quote unquote professional. Be a little more nice. Right? So it's like no other time in my life has anyone actually ever encouraged or invited me to be actually myself, to be authentic. And so, I'm hearing this message, like the word authenticity gets thrown around a lot. And I'm just like, what the fuck? Like, this is a joke, right? Like, this feels like a trap. Like, you're telling me to be authentic. But if I am authentic, you don't like it. People are like, no, not like that.
Not like that. Yep.
That's too much. And so, it was just interesting because like I'm out there in the world trying to like put myself out there day after day, trying to figure out what it looks like to be authentic as everyone's, suggesting. And it just felt like a lot of pressure. And I was like, I don't know how to do this. And I had this idea to create a community where women come together and we get to practice doing some of these things that people tell us to do in the world, but that's not actually accepted in the world. Whether it's be authentic, take up your space, be a leader, like all of these things, we throw these terms around and we tell people to do this, but we don't often talk about the fact that showing up in those ways is not always welcomed or understood or even taken very well. And so it's like, that's scary to do that. And so I had this idea to create this community where we got to practice some of these skills together in a safe environment. And we got to figure out for ourselves, like feel through and say, like, how does it feel? Like, how do I want to show up in the world? What is it like to be authentically me? And a piece of that for me, because I was undiagnosed autistic at the time, but I very much knew I was an introvert. And I actually think a lot of my traits that I associated with introversion were really autistic traits, but I didn't know that at the time. And so I created this women's community. It was about women's empowerment, women's leadership, but it had this focus. I like to say, at She Goes High, we're for introverts by introverts, and the extroverts show up anyway. Like the extroverts are like, there's some people over there. Like, let me go check that out. Right? I'm there. But it was very much, this community was created with introverted preferences in mind. So, hopefully it was a comfortable and welcoming place for introverts to do that work that I talked about, to practice some of those skills of like being authentic, taking up your space, choosing to be fully you and use your skills and getting rid of some of that messaging maybe that you've acquired throughout the years. And so that's what it was about. And then, about 3 years into She Goes High, I started to notice we were attracting a lot of neurodivergent members. And I was like, wow, this is so interesting. We have so many neurodivergent members that are coming to this. And then lo and behold, spoiler alert, I am neurodivergent.
What?
So all the things that I was, who knew?
Who knew?
All these things that I was doing to create this like safe space for people like me. I mean, I didn't know, but it was like, oh, right. I created a safe space for neurodivergent people. And so, so that's kind of the history of like what we've done and what we're about. And so, we most closely resemble a networking group, but we're not a networking group. We don't do elevator pitches, because we're a group of humans coming together as humans. And the work that we do is a piece of that. But I think of She Goes High as we're supporting the human behind the business, not supporting the business or not supporting the person as a business, right? I mean, do you ever get this feeling like as a human being that, you are your business or you are your job all the time? Like that's such a weird feeling, but I feel like it's out there so much. And I was just like, no, I don't want that energy with She Goes High. Like I want this to be about the human and not we're not centering business because that's just a piece of it. That's a small piece.
But it's so important to think about instead of doing the give your elevator pitch and do this. And it's like, great, it's the same monotony. And it's hard for people that are introverted to step up in a room full of people and just talk with 100 eyes on you. It's very intimidating. So
like, give me an authentic elevator pitch.
Like, you're either authentic or you're not. Like, I don't understand this whole like, be authentic and, what's the new buzzword? Authentic leadership. That's the new buzzword. Like, what? You either are or you're not. I don't know. I love the transition into, hey, we want you to be yourself, but then it's like, maybe not that much, but it's fun owning a business and doing what we do because you get to be yourself and you attract the right people anyways, like you have with She Goes High and your business. So, such great points you brought up. Now, as we wrap this up, Chrysta, what advice do you have for listeners?
So this is something I say a lot when I give speeches because, I started my business as a career coach. And like I said, I was speaking in the beginning of my business. As a career coach, I was speaking to help me get clients, but then I moved into a lot more speaking and I wrote my book, Beautiful Badass, How to Believe in Yourself Against the Odds. And something I say a lot, both, throughout my book and throughout the talks that I give and to my clients directly is you do enough and you are enough. And I know that doesn't sound like advice, but it is an invitation to feel into that energy. You do enough. Like, can you just feel into that for a minute? Like, if you say that to yourself, I am enough. Because chances are you've got a lot of people out there telling you something different. They're telling you that it's not enough. You are not enough in this way or that way, or you're too much, right?
All the time.
And so, yes, you do enough and you are enough. So that's what I would share.
Ooh, the you do enough hit home for me big time because it's, yeah, I get I am enough, but you do enough. That's a whole different layer to it. That's something I battle all the time is like, am I doing enough? Am I reaching out to friends enough? Am I like, I'm last. Everyone else is first. So you do enough. Whew, you gave me goosebumps on that one. Chrysta, you are amazing. You are so talented. I am so blessed that our networks align. Shout out to LinkedIn. For those of you listening, if you want to work with Chrysta, if you live in her area, want to join her She's So High group, you want to buy her book, head to the show notes, check her out, connect with her on LinkedIn, and tune in again next week for another episode of That's Business.
If you're looking for a career change and you're not sure where to start, the Resume Rescue can help. Sure, there's no such thing as the perfect fit for everyone, but here at the Resume Rescue, we're on a mission to find the perfect solution for you. Whether it's changing careers, updating a resume, learning LinkedIn, or practicing interviewing, we have you covered. Find us online at theresumerescue.com and find all of our contact info in our show notes.